Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome in. My name is Connor Freely, and I am the Director of External Engagement for CareerWise USA, and very excited to be your moderator today for this webinar. We've got a great panel here today that I'll introduce shortly, but overall, very excited to have you all here today to talk about this very important topic. Today's webinar is part of a broader effort to highlight just how apprenticeship intermediaries and education systems can partner with employers, unions, and state leaders to build sustainable talent pipelines. With this, our objective is clear. We want to help participants understand how these partnerships are opening doors for high school students while also meeting urgent state-level economic development priorities and supporting union and employer workforce needs. This is about more than filling jobs. It's about creating pathways into family-sustaining careers, supporting local economies, and ensuring that our education and workforce systems are truly aligned. We know that demand for skilled trade workers is only growing. All across the country, states and regions are grappling with how to prepare for the next generation of electricians, painters, plumbers, construction managers, what have you, while also responding to the infrastructure investments and critical housing needs. Policies at both the state and local level shape the opportunities available to young people, whether it's through how career and technical education is funded, how union apprenticeship programs engage high school students, or how intermediaries build the bridge between schools and employers. That's why we'll be diving into three central themes today. The first is how state and local policies are creating or sometimes limiting access to apprenticeship opportunities. Second is how schools intermediaries are aligning with CTE programs and training providers to make sure students are prepared and supported. And the third are some good examples of partnerships that are already working and what we can learn from them. With that framing in mind, let's jump in. I'll start by asking each panelist to share a quick overview of their work, their perspective, their story, and learn about where they see the most opportunity to strengthen youth access to construction and skilled trades careers. Together, these leaders represent the ecosystem it takes to make apprenticeship work: policy, education, business, and labor. I'm very excited for them to introduce themselves. I'm very excited for them to be here. Our speakers bring deep expertise from all across the landscape, policy, education, and the trades themselves. So thank you all for joining. Aaron, we'll start with you. If you want to give a quick overview of your story and how you came to this work.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Erin Bebo, I'm Vice President of Strategic Initiatives at CityWorks DC. Why I'm here today is that in my role at CityWorks DC, I co-convene an industry series, several industry-led sector partnerships, one of which is the construction sector partnership for the DC region. That's called DC Builds DC. We co-convened DC Builds DC, and we launched it at the request of industry leaders from construction companies who do work in DC. They may be DC exclusive, regional, national, in a couple of cases global. And basically, they requested that we help them solve two problems that they were seeing. One, and they're sort of inextricably linked challenges. One is that not enough DC residents are interested in and pursuing the construction trades and construction management roles, entry-level management roles in the DC area. That is a return on investment business imperative challenge for them. And the second, which is sort of obvious, but it manifests itself a little bit differently, is that like their companies couldn't confidently rely on local talent to meet their needs. And so their talent strategies were suffering from inefficiencies that they just didn't want to, they wanted to sort of push through such that they could rely on their local talent in ways that they saw peer jurisdictions being able to do. And so our goals are pretty straightforward and industry driven. One is to play the long game and establish stronger relationships with our local schools such that more young people are interested in and pursuing the trades. Two is a goal around actually getting more hires. So, recruitment, selection, and hiring goals. And then three is retention goals. getting hired into the trades is not reason to start your victory lap. There are a lot of opportunities for falling and struggling. And so really collectively thinking about and implementing strategies for um, improving the retention of district residents in these entry-level trades and construction management roles. We do this working with both union and non-union shops for context, and this is important. DC at the moment, in terms of the construction work happening in DC, about 90% of it is non-union, 10% is union.
Perfect. Thank you, Aaron. Now over to Moses.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Moses Ojeda, and I'm the principal of Thomas Edison Career and Technical Education High School, located in Jamaica, Queens, New York. And for me, as a apprentice myself, up and coming, I attend the school that I lead. So I came to Thomas Edison to learn a trade because my parents were instrumental in saying, you like to build things and take things apart. You need to go to a trade school. And so Edison provided that for me. But in this transition, I ran into a teacher who had an impact on my life, and I decided to become a vocational teacher. And so through this apprenticeship model, for 5 years, they prepared me to be a vocational teacher, and I came back. So I'm deeply rooted in this movement because I think that it opens doors, and I'll tell you how. Myself at 18 going into the apprenticeship program allowed me to work alongside adults, people that were veterans. So I learned a lot. I listened and I picked up mentors. And so that quickly molded me to transition seamlessly into the world of industry or in the world of education. So people would always say, Moses, you're so mature for your age, the way you handle yourself, the way you speak. So I really feel that that alone in the apprenticeship world, yes, we're teaching them a trade or we're teaching a work skill, but the benefits of how this person can grow and mature quickly is also something we should be concerned about because it is a plus. And so now, after coming back as a vocational teacher here at Edison for 10 years, I was the assistant principal of all the trade and technical areas for 4 years. And this is my 14th year now as principal. And so for me, I continue to push the work. And I can tell you that it takes a lot when it comes to making the connection, but the rewards are tremendous. So I'm always going to certain places to network, finding out ways how I can bring internship, apprenticeship models to my students. And that's where you meet people in those networking circles. So I'm hoping to share more of that as we move along, but just proud to be here. And I'll say that my daughter graduated from our engineering program last year. And so I'll share that that was a tremendous moment for me to hand her the diploma as a parent, as a father, and a principal. But the fact that she came here meant a lot for me. So I just want to share that and shout her out because she's doing great in the engineering program now at Hofstra. I turn it back to you, Connor. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses, and thank you so much for sharing that. These are the stories that we love to hear, and this is what helps build the apprenticeship movement when we hear these personal stories that are so powerful. John, over to you.
Thanks, Connor. Um, and I'll echo a lot of what Moses said because my background is very, very similar, except I have the union background to go along with that. I come from Dorchester, Massachusetts, an Irish Catholic neighborhood, but did not ever go to private school. Always went to public schools. Ended up in the career and technical education vocational school, Madison Park, in Boston, which is a huge place, easy to get lost, and could see, because I had family who was in the trades, how disconnected and fragmented the relationship between the school and the building trades was in getting people from those career pipelines into a registered apprenticeship program. That being said, I went on to work in the trade for 15 years before coming into the office as an organizer at our local in Boston, and then on to the international as senior advisor to the general president on all things workforce development, infrastructure, capital strategies, how to fund those programs, and also as a federal advocate, where I happen to meet Connor. In there, we examined a fragmented system, and saw that there weren't a lot of, deep connections between registered apprenticeship programs and K-12 CTE programs. Not that they don't exist, absolutely, they exist, but they exist in so many different ways that it's hard for, or it has been hard for unions to rely on one source because we're managing different programs as it goes. So, through that course of time, I've been kind of an embedded wartime reporter, figuring out where those barriers to career to access and opportunity are, where communication breaks down, and roles that intermediaries could play in that. So that leads us to where we are today, and hopefully we can bring some clarity, at least a plan moving forward on how we might be able to bring together that fractured system. Thanks, Connor.
Thank you, John. And I'll now open up our panel discussion, and I'll actually kick it back to you, John. So, from your perspective, why is labor interested in youth apprenticeship? Why is youth apprenticeship good for labor? And how does labor best engage with high schools across the country?
Right. Well, one, I think, it all stems from being an anchor in the community, right? Unions are called locals because, at one time we were local and on every corner to where we existed to make sure that those working in different fields had access to good wages, benefits, retirement security, things like that. And we had, a lot of training programs that existed everywhere, right? We did have partnerships with schools back then. And I think that over time, as that union density has scaled down, the capacity to have those training centers everywhere doesn't exist anymore, right? So it makes sense to build that relationship back into the K-12 system, to have those satellite training opportunities with people that are already doing that work and are already connected to teachers, parents, and students, to have that conversation about what happens at the end of your CTE programming, what happens at the beginning of your registered apprenticeship programming, and what it means to network in a field with a pool of contractors to have a steady career outcome that has wages and benefits that match as you go through, so that you have some stability and some certainty and some self-determination, frankly, over how your life pans out and what you can afford in life, especially right now with all the skyrocketing food prices and energy prices and housing costs and things like that. It's not really, here to build an on-ramp, like Aaron said, and then turn the lights off. Is to manage, support for that student all through his career and make sure that, from root to fruit, they have access to, good benefits that's going to give them a sustainable living.
Thank you, John. Couldn't agree more. This is, I think, the affordability question is key to all of this, and how do we get young people a path to an affordable life? And youth apprenticeship is one of those ways. So now turning it over to Moses on the school side, how do you think schools and CTE programs can better align apprenticeships so that students can see trades as a quality career and a respected option for themselves?
So as a school leader, what I can say is anybody who's leading a CT program, especially with a big push in New York City now with our future ready pathways, there's quite a few grants that people can go for. There's also networking, like I mentioned before. So I was fortunate enough to network, find out about a grant that allowed me last year to create our first HVAC program. I actually brought it back. It actually was a program that was sunset here at Edison a couple of years ago, but we were able to bring it back. And we had success in having students going through apprenticeship. And the way we did that, and I think this is key here, is we spoke to the trades and those individual companies and said, what do you need? And then what we did is we customized the curriculum based on their need. And so what we're doing is we're teaching students the skill sets that that employer needs, and then we send them for an internship. And then the employers tell us, we need a little more refinement in this area, we need a little more in that area, or perfect what you've done, but we're constantly evolving that curriculum. And so I think that instead of just teaching a curriculum that covers everything, yes, we need to cover the basics. But if customizing is a better fit for that employer, that's where I'm seeing gains. So I would say to individuals out there, have those connections with companies because they are looking for the workforce. That's what prompted me to create that HVAC program. And so, again, I think that the time is now, and there's funding not just at the city, but at the state level also, at the federal level, where you can actually make some good connections and figure out how you can support an apprenticeship program or get involved with one at your school.
Thanks, Moses. And yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. The best way to build a career connected pathway is to make sure that pathway is connected to a career. I know that seems simple, but you want to actually have the employer leading the curriculum so that it feeds directly into a career. Zooming out a little bit, Aaron, how do you see the work you're leading with adults laying the foundation for stronger K-12 connections in the future?
So, I think what we've been able to do by starting with the employers is here in is really starting with the end in mind, right? Like we are all career bound in life. I have 3 kids. What do my husband and I want for them? We want them to be able to support themselves and their families if they choose to have one, in the city in which they were born and raised, or, another wherever they choose to land. And that's going to require them to work. And so starting with that end in mind, with the construction sector, we've been able to hear, and John, I love your war journalism. We call ourselves investigative journalists on in our end, so there's a similarity where we're just like digging and digging and digging, and then bringing it back and making the connections. And so I think with starting with the adults has allowed us to really understand what precisely, practically and tactically and systems wise are the biggest barriers that are in our education through workforce system in DC that are, as it pertains to apprenticeship and accessing apprenticeship in the trades, that are the biggest things that are standing between us and success. And there's 3. Broad. Let me say here are 3 top ones. Let me just not make it overly simplify it. One is there's an interest challenge. Simply put, in DC, youth on the whole and young adults are not interested in construction trades, and that's not by accident. When we've done a lot of youth and young adult listening sessions, they will tell us that the adults in their schools are often talking very poorly about the construction trades and in ways that just enforce stereotypes that aren't, in my opinion, very accurate. Or just are like are so superficial that it's just not good career advising. Like, this is a dirty job. Yeah, of course it's a dirty job, but like it's also one where you can grow as a professional. And when I think about a field that like embodies professional development and being able to literally climb the ladder, like I think of construction. And I did not come up in this industry myself. But I admire it deeply for that. It's a less than, it's free if you're not strong academically. Well, hey, guess what? No, you need to actually pass these assessments that require you to have quite a lot of math and reading comprehension skills. And so don't tell students that, if they're not doing well here, they'll all of a sudden be able to thrive in construction, because that's not really a great piece of advice either. And the thing that was missing that we'd heard over and over young people say is, why are they in this field and why do they love it? Is like, no one can take these skills away from me. They are being invested in, they are being poured into, and then they have this literal toolbox of transferable skills that are theirs that they can bring. And that narrative is not being shared in a lot of our schools and a lot of our training programs. Clearly, Moses, you're, the exception there, but like, I think on the whole, there's a real narrative challenge, because I think if a more accurate representative narrative about the trades were out there, there would be a lot more interest. And so in DC, we're trying to get a more accurate narrative out there such that more students and their families are just more open-minded about the trades. The second one, and Fatima or whoever's running the deck, if I think now is when the visual that I have would be shared, would be amazing. Let me just say, DC, this is DC. This may not be New York. This may not be the Boston area. This may not be wherever you're from. This is our reality, and DC is the status quo. It is very much the exception that anyone transitions directly from high school or a GED program into a registered apprenticeship in the trades. It is very rare for that to happen. It happens, it is very rare. 90% of all candidates are going into either and this is true for union and open shop, that they are transitioning into a pre-apprenticeship or a laborer helper. And those are wonderful. And there's also a lot of attrition in both. There can be a lot of attrition in both of those sort of entry points, especially in the skilled laborer helper roles, where those are relatively low paying. And if you're a young person needing to navigate that world, you may struggle, especially struggle to take the apprenticeship entrance assessment, pass it the first time. You may not be able to afford the things you need to afford. You may get distracted. Life may happen, right? And what we want to do is to really try and shift that the reality such that the norm is more of a seamless transition or more of a reliable transition directly into registered apprenticeship. Because in the DC area, this sort of middle bump is real and is a barrier. And then the last thing I'll say, and Moses touched upon this, is like the misalignment challenge. And that is not all high school and training programs are effectively aligned in terms of content, in terms of what the skilled trades are looking for. We developed, and I can put it in the chat. I hope these links work. These are actually two different links. The first is just a link to the CityWorks Talent Pipeline toolkit, which has a bunch of resources. The second is a specific link to construction job readiness rubric that our DC Builds DC industry leaders put together to share with education and training providers to say what specifically they were looking for in entry-level roles. Because the candidates that they were getting from the schools without that guidance document were not meeting it. And they were like, what is happening here? In DC, students don't get driver's ed, and that's a requirement for a lot of union roles, a lot of open shop roles. And so these students were doing everything that they were supposed to do in school, and they were like, oh my God, I don't have a driver's license, and that's why I didn't get a job. So we're trying to course correct that. And then in the assessment, in our end, we've heard from most unions and other shops that about 50% of candidates are not passing the apprenticeship assessment the first go round. It used to be math that was driving it almost exclusively. Now reading comprehension is coming in hot with indications that candidates are not, or their attention span around reading is diminishing, and they're struggling that way. So we're working with schools to try and boost their math and reading comprehension, so it's more likely that they'll pass the assessment the first time around.
Perfect. Thanks, Aaron. And thank you for this graphic. This is super helpful. Now looking a little bit towards the future, John, if you could picture a successful partnership between labor and K-12 around youth apprenticeship, what would it look like, and what role can intermediaries play in making it happen? And important plug, how do you see the work of EAA helping see that through?
Right. I mean, I think we're at a point in time where, where there's so much connectability between everybody from Zoom meetings to national meetings to apprenticeship being on the national, dialogue that's out there. And what's I think, the past administration has helped that by promoting apprenticeship. along with, currently that still being out there. I think, all of the barriers that Aaron described are correct, right? I think the partnerships and the value of the intermediary is to help erase those barriers. I know, internally with unions that we're working to erase a lot of those barriers, high school diploma requirements, driver's license requirements, things like that, that in a modern world don't make sense, right? There's, so many modes of transportation now. There is, not necessarily a need for certain skills that that pertain to the job, that we want to make sure that we're erasing every barrier, especially if we're getting into, recruiting, people where they're at, right? Versus, trying to get people to come to us, right? So getting in there and building that relationship with those K-12 schools along with the intermediary, I think would help to outline what those barriers are. I think in a perfect world, what that would look like is an articulation program, because our programs are labor management, that they are industry driven, because it's skills that our contractors look for, and our contractors are contractually obligated to hire our apprenticeships through our collective bargaining agreements, that it makes sense to work as one within the school to develop, what looks like maybe a first year of our apprenticeship within that school, so that students get credit for that first year, so that they can come out at a wage scale and an employability rate that puts them on the job ready to go day one, at a wage scale that's competitive with all the other industries that school counselors tell people they should go to, versus construction, because they might get dirty. I know, Aaron, we try to make it cool with shows like Dirty Jobs and everything, but it's still tough to get, young people to want to get up at 4 in the morning and go get yelled at by a construction boss. Um, but we're making strides, and we're going to get there. And I think that happens by building that community within, right? I think it's managing expectations and talking to students and constantly being a presence in their lives, so that they see a familiar face, so that they understand what they're getting into. I think a lot of programs right now are at the set it and forget it phase, right? That a lot of folks come in, they give handshakes, they take a photo, they give maybe a monetary donation and say, hey, we're doing something good, right? But is it something that actually makes sense, right? The only thing that really makes sense is to build those deep relationships, not only with the student and with the instructor and with that intermediary, but also with the parents, teachers, and students and the communities that surround, so that they understand the opportunities. Because I also believe that there is a huge role for government here, right? Municipal, state, local governments, to know that the policies that are in place need to have demand drivers for these programs in order for them to be successful, right? So if there are not enough open slots and not enough work out there that is tied to these programs, right? You have less opportunities for unions to take in people to graduate them through their apprenticeship programs, so on and so forth, because there's just no place to put widgets if you increase supply but have no demand, right? So I think, having those conversations, building those relationships between all groups is super helpful. I think the specific role of the intermediary is where, unions and schools don't have all the capacity, right? The CTE school may not have, somebody that is tasked with scheduling all the different things that has to be done in there, or the relationships, or the meetings with the school board or the municipality or whoever that might be, right? Also, in keeping things aligned, checking metrics, making sure that, outcomes and placements are, at the levels that, our goals say that they're going to be. I think that's extremely helpful, because, again, most of the people on staff in both places, whether it's CTE or a union registered apprenticeship, are tasked with training, right? They're tasked with the things, the obligations that they have with municipal and state government and federal government on the registered apprenticeship side, to provide that information, those reports on what they're using funds on, things like that. So there's a lot of capacity that can be added by using that intermediary, and making sure that things run a lot smoothly. and can, do that kind of triage when things are going wrong as well, right? And keep those together. Because when we're talking about communities, especially in the professional space, we're talking about coalitions, right? And if people don't have the roles and there are gaps in there, then things fall apart. So I think it's extremely helpful to have an intermediary like CareerWise helping us, put all this work together, especially if we're looking at national programs.
Awesome. Thank you, John. And I know we're seeing a little bit of this in the chat, but Aaron, what challenges have you faced as intermediary building partnerships across labor, education, industry, and what lessons could be helpful, you think, for others learning and trying to get into this work?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about some of them before. I think the one that I didn't talk about is that uh in my experience, there's not a standard playbook. There are so many variables that differ by jurisdiction. So, um, the like union non-union dynamic, or whether it's a union town or a all open shop town, matters. What types of work is happening, and as John mentioned, what's the demand, like who's got, and how does that shift? Right now we are, I mean, DC has always had steady construction work, and then we'll have spikes. And we are preparing for one of the biggest spikes that we have had in the recent past. One project alone, if you're a football fan, the DC Commanders, who are a football team, are returning to DC, and not even just a mile down the street from where I live is where our football stadium will be returning. And estimates are that 14,000 over the duration of that, like 5 to 6 year project, that is going to require 14,000 new construction professionals to, lead and contribute to that work. Our current estimates in DC, and I feel so, I should just round it, but 1,395 DC residents are known to be employed currently in this construction trades. Oh my goodness. Um, when you compound that, and John, you were talking about policy at the local level, DC has a policy called First Source. I don't know if that's common in other jurisdictions, but the way it transpires for us is that for projects with the project labor agreement, 51% of new hires to any project should be DC residents. If that's not met, there are penalties, there are, carrots, there are sticks. And First Source is very front and center for our employers. And so, what all of those dynamics that I just talked about really matter. And with some of these new projects coming on board, um, parties have become so much more willing to bend and to think about innovation, and push themselves all around in terms of meeting those needs. When I hear from jurisdictions that don't have the challenges that are on this visual still in front of you, I'm like, what got you there? They're like, yeah, the demand so far exceeded the supply, and we just figured out how to do it. Um, and so I'll just repeat, like, the fact that there isn't a standard playbook, that I can't necessarily go to John and be like, John, you figure this out. Moses, you're amazing. Like, what can I do? Like, give me your playbook. It's not going to work necessarily unless those dynamics are perfectly matched up. Uh, we just hosted some construction leaders from a nearby city, and they were like, this is great. Here are the areas that are going to work for us, and none of these conditions are the same for us. So, like, thanks for these, but like these ones aren't going to work. They work for you, but they won't work for us. That's hard. Um, because you do feel like you're kind of figuring it out on your own, and it would be nice for there to be some more efficiencies.
Thanks, Aaron. And when it comes to maybe addressing some of those challenges. Moses, from your experience, I would like to hear what state or local policies are most critical in opening doors for students into construction and skilled trades careers. What can the government here do to help?
So for me, it really comes down to age requirement, right? That seems to be the major um, area of concern when it comes to preparing these kids. However, I will say that when you have conversations, like we have conversations with the MTA here, our students are able to take the service technician entry exam level exam before they're 18. They're just on hold to be called. So that's a win for me because kids have been hired after they graduate from medicine or once they hit 18. But I think we need to learn from other states that are already ahead of New York City and that have already had those conversations with certain union leaders or to kind of revamp the state and local policies. I think in every field currently, the state that we're in, we're seeing that what was done in the past is not working for the future, right? And I'm speaking not just from career, but also education. So the change is now, and so we'd have to have those conversations. There is a need, and so how can we work together to give you that need that we can fulfill with you for your needs? Because we do have kids who want to go into the trade areas. So for me, again, I think having those conversations is also reaching out. Again, I tell people, be part of a political action committee, join your community board, just so you can advocate. You never know who knows someone in that circle that can bring a meeting to the table. So for me, it's about just keep pushing because eventually I think we will be able to see that change that's coming.
Thank you, Moses. I'm gonna pause quickly to open up some audience questions. This is for everybody, and the first one is from Jama, uh, who says, "Construction seems to be the most challenging for me for them to create pre-apprenticeships to apprenticeship pathways due to the age concern, which you were just talking about, Moses. Any best practices you guys could share, both across labor intermediaries or in education?" And anyone can jump in.
So
I know that it's also in the chat, and I would just say that, one thing with the pathway to registered apprenticeship, when there's a relationship there with a labor management registered apprenticeship, we have access to a lot of job sites, right? We know the schedules, we know the project schedules that go on. So it's easier for us to gain access to give, young people on site, experience there. But also there's also a lot of virtual reality out there right now too in the trades that can be used in the school, that give, young people the opportunity to get on the giant lifts and things like that. But again, I think all of this comes from relationships, and building in kind of like, what this looks like for each particular place based on what barriers that already exist there, right? And kind of figuring out those together.
Thanks, Sean. Moses, did you have something you wanted to add there?
yes, John, thank you for those words. For me, again, I think based on what was asked, it's just being proactive and thinking outside the box. All right. So I think the one thing that we do here at Edison is not only do we share our best practices, as Erin had said, it's always good to share, but I always tell them it's going to work or look differently in your place. Just make sure you customize it for your needs. But in having those conversations, as Erin said, we found out quickly that in order for a kid to be hired in HVAC, they need a driver's license. So we had to jumpstart our driver's ed program at Edison. And so I'm happy to say that it's going live this year. So again, you can best set up these kids for the future when they're 18 or when they're ready to join if they have those skill sets, because I know when they go for that interview, if they have, as John said, some of those skill certificates, they will bump that line and be in front of it. And so again, there's things we can do in-house as a CT school to better prepare them for the future.
Thanks, Moses. If anybody else has any questions, please put them in the chat. I'm going to jump into a quick final lightning round of questions here. But if we have time after, we'd love to answer any other questions people have. So diving into lightning round for some quick hitter questions. John, what advice would you give to other union leaders who are just beginning to explore youth apprenticeship as part of their workforce strategy?
I would say, the first thing is to look at the current environment that they're in, right? Market density is closing in, and that's not by accident, right? There's also a ton of huge mega projects that are happening around the country. You see markets expanding, whether that's renewable energy or the AI supply chain with data centers, semiconductor fabs, battery plants. There's the new sectors that are coming out right now in the construction space are gigantic. Some of these buildings are as big as cities. And I know that there are workforce gaps that are already historic around the country where folks need to, work together in community of practice to figure out how best to serve those industries and make sure that, we capitalize on what's out there. For unions, I think the quickest path to that is to start building relationships with schools, identifying what barriers are there for people to get direct entry. One other thing that we've been doing is preferencing those programs, right? There's a lot of different apprenticeship standards that we have to submit, and how we recruit and enter people into our registered apprenticeship programs. Um, you know, some of those programs do not have ranked pool, which allows you to preference programs that you're engaged in. So if you build that relationship and preference that program in there, you get a direct pipeline, not only of new people, new members coming in that can serve the industry, but also relationships to build yourself into that anchor of the community that has, your finger on the pulse of, what's needed, where to scale, and who to be in touch with.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. Aaron, what advice would you give to intermediaries who are attempting to start a construction pathway work, aligning partners across the community?
I think it's really important to start with the industry. Order of operations really matters. Start with those who are hiring and figure out what they believe to be true and what their top pain points are, and go from there. Um, I think when you start with any other entity, if you start with the schools, you'll get, you'll hear what the school's challenges are and you'll solve for that. And that may not be what the employer's challenges are. If you start with the government, you'll hear what the government's challenges are. So I'd say order of operations matters. And if the focus is getting young people hired into apprenticeships, start with who has the apprenticeships, who's making those hiring decisions, and start with them and fold people in uh, accordingly.
Yep, couldn't agree more. And Moses, from your experience, what would you say, like what shifts in mindset among educators, parents, students, the whole school ecosystem are most needed to make apprenticeship a truly and widely embraced pathway?
Great question. Something I'm up against every day. Most of the students that attend Edison want to go on to college because that's what the parents are pushing for. So for me, it's about highlighting case studies. For me, it's about highlighting what the future can hold and the different levels, right? Because sometimes the mindset is that they're going to be an entry. But as Aaron said, if we prepare them properly, they could be leading a team. They could be so much more ahead of what they're required to do once they enter that entry level position. And so that's what we're trying to do here. And so I put in a chat before that I invested in a career connected learning advisor. So that advisor is in the same college space that we used to have our college advisor. So the mindset is one location because either pathway is viable. It's your choice. And we're going to tell you how you can connect that pathway or career to a college level degree. And something that I'm always hearing from industry partners is the fact that some of these kids coming out of college are not prepared the way they want. That's what sparked me to create that customized curriculum. So if we can show them at Addison what they need, but also have dual enrollment courses that are already getting them prepared for that career, I think that's a win. And that's where we're seeing some traction. But I think we need more case studies for families to say, you know what, it's okay to go into construction. It's okay to go into HVAC. You know, when you think about HVAC, you might think just one thing, but I had two students that were just picked up and trained in Ohio to be servicing servers in the computer world because of AI. And these kids had an IT background, but I was able to give them that HVAC program that propelled them now to be hired in this new company. So those are the gains that I'm talking about when you're able to just communication is key, right? Case studies is the way.
Absolutely. And just diving into some of the questions in the chat, Moses, I know you answered this in the chat, but maybe helpful to talk about it writ large. How have you like what has your experience been providing certifications like NCCER and OSHA in high school? And is there anything you can share best practice wise to make that seem a little bit less scary?
Sure, sure. OSHA is definitely an asset. We do have NCCR for our electrical installation students, but we offer OSHA not just in electrical installation. We're offering it in the automotive, we're offering it in the collision and refinishing, and we're offering it in our engineering, robotics, drone program. So anywhere where we see there's a high level of need for safety awareness, we're certifying those kids with OSHA, and that is definitely a gain, right? That company doesn't have to do that. And so to take it a little bit further, I use particular type of equipment in my automotive department that the dealerships in the area use. And why do I do that? Because I can get my students certified in that equipment before they go to the interview. So as an employee, I'm saying to myself, all right, I'm going to take Connor over Aaron because Connor comes certified from Edison and I don't have to go spend money now to train Connor, right? But I'd have to spend money to train Aaron. So those are the little gains that I'm talking about that you can make to
Mhm.
make groups more um uh to gain the employment, right? Employable.
Can I add something to that? Everything that Moses said, yes. Um, what can be tricky and what is really important is that not all employers value the same certifications in the same sort of ways. And so uh we hear, right now we're in a bit of a moment where we're hearing like MC3 and then it's like no NCCER or like OSHA and you need to really have a process to understand um I mean, in an ideal world, everybody would be on the same page and all speaking in one voice on the employer side or union side and saying like this one, but having a process in place to really to check and understand what like the volume of interest, such that just not the loudest voice gets their wishes across, but that you're really understanding, okay, who's using what. Um, what we've heard is that like the extent to which any high school programs can like result in NCCER core, those are those graduates who are really accelerating directly into apprenticeship. Those are the ones who are getting straight through. And so that's been helpful feedback for the schools to understand. Sort of what matters and by whom, and like really what, to Moses's point, like what sets you apart from others? Like what of these things what is the most important?
Absolutely. And I just I think we'll go one more question before we wrap. This is also from Jama. And I'm assuming BWC is workers' comp. And Jama asked, do your states have any workers' comp protections for businesses to participate in work-based learning or pre-apprenticeships? I know it's state by state when it comes to that stuff. So I think maybe if either of you three have experience sort of assuaging the business concerns, the employer concerns when it comes to liability risks, such as workers' comp and things like that. How do you pitch that to a business and say, don't worry about it, this isn't scary, this is good for everybody and we can make this work.
We put it in the collective bargaining agreement. No.
There we go.
Um, outside of that, I mean, we do have, different states where again, it's political advocacy, right? In Massachusetts, when a student is laid off, he's eligible to collect, because we have block training, he's eligible to collect for that week that he's in block training. It's different, it is different in different areas, but it's all, again, it's a nuanced conversation to have with For us, it's with our employer associations, so it's an easier conversation because it's with a small group of employers that, vote on what happens with the whole, and that might be, a list of three to 400 signatory employers that abide by those rules. So, but over and all, if it's good for the program and it helps retain workers and gets them to meet their demands, then they're for it. They're not against it.
Perfect. Thank you, John. So if the few minutes have left, let's wrap up. Thank you to all of our panelists. This has been super, super helpful. And thank you to everyone who's joined to listen in and offer some questions. I think what we've heard this afternoon makes it very clear. Connecting high school students to careers in construction and in the skills trade. It's not just about filling jobs, it's about building communities, as John said, and it's about expanding opportunities for young people. And it's about meeting the economic development needs of our states and our cities. None of that happens in isolation. It takes alignment across policy, across education systems, getting all that together, as Aaron was saying, across unions and employers and across all of our communities to make it work. Listening to the conversation, I think there were three big themes that stood out to me. The first is that policy really matters. The choices that states and local governments make, whether it's how we fund CTE programs or how we design incentives for employers or how we structure the apprenticeship programs themselves, those choices shape what opportunities are available for our students. Good policy creates the foundation for strong programs. Second, it's clear that partnerships are essential. We heard some powerful examples today of what happens when intermediaries, schools, unions, and employers all come together at the table. Those collaborations open the door for students to step directly into training programs that lead to well-paying, high-quality careers. And third, this is about economic priorities. Every state is working to meet growing infrastructure and housing needs, and at the same time, we're trying to build strong, inclusive economies where people can support their families and work through the affordability crisis. Apprenticeship pathways in the trades do both. They provide the workforce we need, and they create the opportunity for the next generation. So before we close, I just want to leave you with this thought. We are really in a unique moment of opportunity. Between the federal infrastructure investments and state commitments to career pathways, the conditions are really right to expand youth access to trades in ways that are both ambitious and lasting. And that means that we all have a role to play. If you're a policymaker, look for ways to support apprenticeship at the state or local level. If you're a school district or a school leader, think about how you can connect your CTE programs to union training opportunities. And if you're part of an intermediary, keep building those bridges between the two. Keep building those bridges between education and industry. And if you're a union leader or an employer, make sure you open the door wider to young people who are ready to contribute and ready to learn. Because when we do this work together, we ensure that more high school students don't just graduate with a diploma, they graduate with a lifelong career pathway in hand. A pathway that gives them purpose, provides stability for their families, and strengthens our communities and our economies at the same time. Uh, I'd like to highlight a couple of upcoming events. Our next webinar in this series is going to be on October 28th. If you're curious about youth apprenticeship in other industries, please come join us at the National Youth Apprenticeship Summit hosted by CareerWise and PAYA, December 4th to 5th in Alexandria, Virginia. There's a QR code on the next slide, I think, that you can scan to get registered, and we'll also send some follow-up after this. So we'd love to see you there. We'd love to have you be a part of it. It's going to be super exciting. We get a great lineup set up for that event. So please scan that QR code and join us. But above all, thank you all again. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to all our attendees. Thank you for being part of this conversation. I hope you all leave today not just informed, but inspired and ready to take action in your own community to move this movement forward. So thanks, everyone.